Hey everybody, welcome back to On Stage, Off Stage. I'm your host, George Sapio, and I want to take a deep breath, and be grateful that 2020 is finally over. And we have a golden chance in 2021 to take a good look at where we are and how we live and how we want our lives to go, and how we can make things better with a little peace, love, and most importantly, mutual understanding and consideration for the health of others. This episode 137, marks the beginning of my 10th year producing this podcast. I never thought I'd get past the first 6 months, but the opportunities to talk theater with people from around the globe just kept coming. So here we are, and I am very glad you're all with me. So this month we have as our guest Janice Rabian. Janice is a costume designer and a storyteller, and earlier this year she conducted a research survey of a number of theaters and asked them specifics on how COVID-19 had affected their professions. Yeah, I know, it's a no-brainer that this virus has completely changed how we produce and attend theater, but speaking to her pool of respondents, Janice learned more than she expected.
So, let's see, I found you through HowlRound and your wonderful article, The Necessity of Pivoting, and I guess it's the hot topic right now for everybody in theater. Are we going to survive? How are we going to survive now that arguably the most critical portion of our industry, which is the audience right in front of us, has been, eliminated in most cases, along with a lot of theaters that have been eliminated. So how did you come to engage in this interview? And let's talk about some of the questions that you selected. So let's start with, how did you get involved in doing this in the first place?
I got involved in conducting these interviews in the first place because, like most theater makers, I was staring down a summer with no work. And I was starting to panic a little bit about how I was going to pay my rent, and I was trying to find other avenues of income. And my university, the McGuire Ethics Center on campus, does a yearly fellowship that is public service and research-based every summer.
And which campus was this, by the way?
Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so this fellowship is paid with a stipend, and I had a little bit of research experience from my undergraduate degree. And so I very quickly, I think I had 1 week from finding this fellowship till when all of the paperwork was due for a proposal. I put together this idea to interview companies in our industry of varying sizes and figure out, just kind of hear how they were doing in this time. And I think that was also partially I was trying to kind of quantify or figure out what was happening around me and get some semblance. I think I was trying to figure out for myself where this was all going and what was happening to companies who I had worked with or who I was hoping to work with down the line. And so that's how I came to this project.
Where were you at that particular point when everything changed?
I was here in Texas. In fact, I distinctly remember I had a dance show that was opening that very weekend, and I had been through tech, and it was opening night, and I was sitting there with a friend in the audience. And between each dance number, there's traditionally an intermission that's about 10 minutes, and they'll bring the lights up. And it was all anybody could talk about, and everybody was checking their phones, and you could hear the talking around us of, oh, do you hear there's a travel ban, travel's been shut down, and then the next intermission it was, there's all these cases reported in Washington. And so I remember sitting there with my friend, and we were just kind of hearing this thing bubble and grow around us. And then I think it was 3 days later, Dallas and Texas went into lockdown.
Wow. Lockdown is a new thing for everybody.
Yeah.
How did that affect your classmates and of course yourself? I mean, because you were all there in classes, and then all of a sudden you weren't, I guess.
Yeah, it was weird because I think a lot of people kind of experience this. You don't get to have a chance to like say goodbye or say, hey, this is the plan next week. So it just kind of happened, drop of a hat. And so we quickly pivoted to Zoom classes along with the rest of the country. And it was all right. I mean, like my art history lecture forged ahead, but for my design classes, it was a little bit more difficult because in a theater design program, it's all based on critique, and a lot of that critique environment is based on who you're with in that room and the energy. And so it took us a while to get used to that digital format.
How did you accommodate that? Because it's one of those things where, let me look at what you've done, and there's immediate personal, tactile, interpersonal. So I'll find a word for this in a second.
No, I get what I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was hard because, transitioning to a digital format and communicating information that way was a big learning curve. Like it was kind of small things, so you can't look at a whole corkboard wall of your work in one big glance. Right. Now you have to put it all through like Google Slides because you're sharing screen on Zoom. And so we kind of had to figure out what was the best way to communicate information digitally, which I think is so important. I think it's going to happen more as we move forward.
Yeah, we're going to get to that because that's a big question now.
Yeah. So that was, we had to figure out how to communicate digitally. We still were working with guest directors who would come in on a project and consult on the design. And so it was how to facilitate what felt like an open group conversation when you can't talk over each other on Zoom. The platform just doesn't allow for it.
Yeah.
So trying to create that casual tone while still giving everybody space to talk took some time. And I think by the end we got pretty good at it.
Yeah, we've had to redefine how we actually physically communicate to each other now.
Yeah.
Instead of sitting around a table and interrupting each other or, jockeying for armrests or whatever it happens to be, we're doing this all by tech. And there's a different, completely different protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think I think people are sometimes cautious when approaching it through tech, or there's a different etiquette to tech, which sometimes takes out that wonderful energy that I love so much from a room of us bouncing around ideas. But I think designers are adapting fairly well.
Yeah, well, I think we're all adapting better than we thought. Once you get past the initial, can you hear me? Can anybody see me? Hello?
Exactly. And I think we're finding, I think this is every industry across the country, that perhaps we didn't all have to be meeting in person quite so often as we were, which can be great, but isn't convenient for everybody. And so we could be working digital platforms and more just to accommodate for everybody's life.
It's nice because, you don't have to be in person so much, which for me personally is an asset. It's definitely an uptick in the process. So let's talk about the actual interviews. What kind of questions did you come up with? And then we'll start talking about some of the answers that you got.
I know I talk about it in my HowlRound article, but initially my questions, I was trying to quantify a bit more or be a bit more data specific in the way I asked questions. So one of the things I wanted to know was, were audience members responding to what companies were offering, and were people talking back and giving them feedback on their approach with digital platforms? And so when I started my process, I think I asked them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best and most feedback, and 1 being, they're not talking about it, or it's really bad feedback. But within like 3 interviews, I kind of figured out that it's really difficult to ask someone to do that. And so I just kind of ditched the scaling of the question and began asking, are people giving feedback? What are some of the things they're saying? Are you seeing interactions on your social media platforms, or are they emailing you directly?
So these were conversations. These weren't just, lists of questions sent out and hoping for a return.
Truly. And I think you probably get this with your podcast, with talking with theater professionals, is maybe you think it's going to be a list of questions and they'll answer, and it quickly kind of goes off in a different direction or becomes more organic. And so that's what started to change my approach. As I would hop on Zoom thinking, and I would promise in my email asking them to talk to me, oh, it's going to be 20 minutes, quick questions. And an hour later, we'd still be sitting there and I'd be like, I still haven't got to the rest of this list. I mean, we've been talking about this one topic, which spun off into another topic. And so sometimes I found that they answered the questions before I needed to ask them. Mm-hmm. And I could move on to a different question that I had. I also asked them things like, were they planning programming to help recover revenue that they lost from ticket sales? If they had been partnering with other organizations in their area that maybe they hadn't worked with in the past. And the hardest question, I think, was when we were in the summertime, particularly, and thinking, oh, I think by fall we're going to be good. How were they preparing for that green stage? Because states were starting to open back up, as we now know, prematurely. Yeah. And so that was another difficult question, as some places were planning and were starting to get PPE loans and to prepare with sanitation methods. And some places were like, no, we're going to hold off and see how this goes.
Yeah, because nobody knew where they were going. Nobody knew how long this was going to last. Mm-hmm. And to all of a sudden change the way you do things, the way you structure your entire business, depends on how long that structure is going to have to remain in place.
Yeah.
And since we know most theaters are so overloaded with money, they're giving it away on the streets. That was sarcasm, by the way. Every dollar counts. Every dime counts. So it's very hard to know what to do and for how long you're going to do it and how much to invest.
Yeah, and I think that was I found that was the hesitation for a lot of companies, is could they afford the money and time to prepare for that type of thing when we still didn't know the course that the virus was going to take. And some places did have the resources and did have the time, and so they were ready to begin to prepare for reopening or to immediately begin programming that had some in-person components. And some other companies, I think one of the things holding them back from saying that is that they just couldn't afford to jump in and hope that it worked out. They had to take a moment and sit and watch what was going to happen around them and see what worked and what didn't.
Sure, yeah. It's because nobody's ever faced this before, and nobody's ever thought that we'd have to face this before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What was the toughest question that people had to answer?
I think the last one that I asked, I kind of foolishly walked in being like, oh, and we're going to stay upbeat and we're going to end on a positive note. And so I would always close with the question, what has been the most positive discovery that you've made in this time? Because I'm figuring that everybody's like me and wants to look on the bright side and the glass half full and wants to think about the silver lining. And some people are like me, and for some people it was really difficult, and it was a really hard question to answer, given how depressing some of the previous answers to questions had been. I mean, these companies were in very dire positions, and so to then ask these leaders, what has been the most positive discovery you've made? Some people had to take a minute to think about it. But everybody did answer very graciously. And what I found from most people is the thing that had been the most positive had been the chance to slow down for a minute because you had to, because you didn't have another choice, which I think is really hard for individuals in this industry. I think it's hard for companies to do. And that gave these companies the chance to look inwardly at their operations and the way they'd been producing in their mission, and to decide if that was a system they wanted to continue to move forward with or how they wanted to change things in a time where you kind of have to and now have the opportunity to.
Yeah, it's life decisions for theaters. Did any of the theaters come out and say, hey, this has actually been a blessing in disguise because now we get to think about all the changes that we never had time to do, or we're thinking about, we can come back in 6 months with a better, stronger business plan or dynamic for producing?
Yes, a couple of places did say that. I think when a company's been running for so long, you start to kind of fall into the way you've always done things. And it can be difficult to get out of that rut, especially when producing is your primary source of income. So a couple of places did express that the chance to slow down and to really think about how they wanted to operate moving forward. Some places talked about sustainability, and they felt like some of the practices they had had for a while weren't sustainable anymore. And so they could begin to change their operating systems and implement some more sustainable practices to keep the company from burning out in the long run. So a couple of places did express that.
Yeah. It's just interesting because, you get thrown for a loop like this, a major, absolute major loop that affects the entire industry. And it's interesting to see how some people respond. Some people are like deer in the headlights, and other people are like, yes, now
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. Okay, so what was your sample pool? How many people did you initially put this out to? How many responded? And what was your total amount of responses for this?
Let's see. I identified a couple of cities where I knew I had contacts, or my sponsoring organization, the Cape Fear Regional Theater, had contacts and could help me get some interest for the interviews. And so by the end of the process, I had emailed about 90 theaters, seeing if they were interested in interviews. And I think in total, I ended up speaking to 33 companies. When I initially started, I really kind of figured that everyone was like me and just sitting around watching Netflix, and they had nothing to do but answer emails. So I very foolishly was like, I'm going to get so many responses. And I think I was surprised when people didn't email back and weren't immediately jumping at it. And it took me a while to kind of not only temper my expectations, but realize that I needed to give these people grace for the fact that they were trying to keep their companies from going under, and didn't necessarily have the time or didn't know who I was. And so they were like, well, I don't know you very well, so that's nice, but thank you, I'm not interested. And so that definitely changed my approach to the project. And the interviews that I did have were so wonderful and really enriching. So I'm thankful for the people who did respond.
That's good. Yeah, it's kind of tough to do that. To actually start talking about the situation that you're right smack in the middle of, problem-wise, because half the people don't know where they're going, and the other half only have vague ideas. In the sample pool, let's talk about the kind of theaters that, are we talking about 99-seat Lloyd theaters? We're talking about community theaters, regional theaters. Who are these folks?
You just hit on it. I really tried to get the whole spectrum of theater in America within these regions and cities that I was looking at, because most of the headlines that I was seeing about the effect of the pandemic on the industry was related to Broadway. And I love Broadway. I've seen some wonderful shows, but Broadway makes up such a small percentage of our industry across the entire country.
Right. Yeah.
So I really wanted to stray as far away from that level as I could. And so I spoke to small community theaters who get in about 500 audience members a year. And I spoke to regional theaters who have budgets of in the millions to work with throughout the year, and who see audiences reaching into 50,000 every year. And so I really tried to, one theater sees about 100,000 audience members a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and they work with budgets in the millions. And so I really wanted to get that wide spectrum of how are these big regional houses coping with what's happening, and how are these smaller community spaces doing. Because I think that's important. A lot of families, community theater is like their introduction. Not everybody gets to go see Broadway, and this is how a lot of kids get interested in theaters, through these smaller family houses. And yet, you know, regional theater is award-winning, and in a lot of cases has reached great heights and sets the tone for a lot of our art form. And so I think it was important to look at how these two extremes were handling what was happening and everything in between.
Yeah. So interesting the way the various levels of theaters would respond, but I think they all have the common thing is, can we afford to keep this going, and how do we actually reach our audience? Which leads me to the next big thing here, and that is the theaters have had to stop the audience from coming in because nobody wants to get infected, but they still have to produce their work. So I'm going to go in two different directions from here, and I'll start with this one. When you spoke to any of these theaters, did any of them talk to you about their populations, their neighborhoods, the people who generally come to the theater, their communities? How many of them were, I'm going to say, more aware than typical of what was going on outside their theater doors?
I would say about a third of them kind of hit that standard that you just described. I did some research before my interviews. I looked up the city census for each region and the average household income, just to get an idea of what these theaters were working with on a really general scale. And it was really great to see that a portion of them were so in tune with their community and knew what they were asking for. They knew why people came back to them. They knew how to access them without putting them in danger and bringing them into a certain space.
Right.
And so that was really great. And I think some other companies were still kind of trying to figure out how exactly to do that. I would say that all of them had some idea of their community and who was regularly coming to them and who they wanted to access, right? Like, that's part of the theater's operations, is they know their audience base and they know who they want to bring in next. But I would say about a third of them like really knew their community and had a really good tap into what they were looking for and how best to access them and how best to serve them in this time. A couple of companies had created programming that wasn't for any revenue at all and was just simply to serve the communities and keep them sane. A couple of companies that particularly had good educational and children's programs were running like nighttime stories through Zoom, where you could log on and an actor would read a bedtime story to your kids while you had a few minutes to sit down and kind of unwind for your day. So kind of giving
that is such a good idea.
Right, because like parents are spending all this time at home with their kids and also trying to work from home. And so a couple of companies had started programming like that, and we're hearing great responses from their communities. One company, I want to make sure I have the name right. The Bishop Arts Theater, which is in Dallas, Texas, was doing a patio live series where they were combating isolation in their senior citizen demographic. And so they were producing performances in patios and parking lots of senior living facilities. So they knew that this was their community who regularly came to see their programming, and so they were bringing it to them to help combat the isolation that these people are feeling right now.
That's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be doing.
Yeah. And that same artistic director had a quote that I remember putting in the article, talking about how the community's been responding to things, and it basically boiled down to if you take care of the community will take care of you.
Yeah, I believe that. And it's nice to see some people who think that and believe it enough to put it into practice, because look, we all know from experience that theaters struggle every day just to keep the doors open, to keep the lights on, okay? Mm-hmm. And a large portion of the upper level is bent on getting money in the door and reaching out to the audience in order to get them to come into the theater and to keep this symbiotic relationship going. But to turn around and say, hey, we're going to read bedtime stories because now, you know what, this isn't going to cost us much, but we can actually do something for the community where we don't really expect something in return. But, we're building goodwill and we're showing the community that we care. And maybe we can do something to help them a little bit. I think that's a wonderful thing to do.
Mm-hmm. I think it's wonderful. I also, I know a lot of the theaters in downtown Washington, D.C. I lived outside that area for a little bit, and my friends still work there. And I know that during the Black Lives Matter protests in May and June, those theaters were opening their doors and providing water and snacks and bathrooms for people who were involved in the protests. And so that's another way that companies have been involved at this time and taking care of their community, even on a level that doesn't involve performance. Simply, hey, you can come use the bathroom and here's a water bottle.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to actually get back to Black Lives Matter and that area of conversation in a moment. But I do want to ask this. Out of the 33 companies that you did interact with, have any of them closed?
At the time of the interviews, one company had closed. That was partially because the executive director was in a transitional part of their lives and had been considering whether or not to keep the company open anyways.
Yeah.
And so I know one did for sure. Since that time, I don't know if any of them have, but a couple of them were considering it or weren't sure that they were going to make it through the next calendar year. Or I know one of the companies I spoke to in Orlando, Florida, had seen a couple companies around them fold and were trying to figure out how to stay afloat, seeing that in their neighboring companies.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. I'm hoping that all of them somehow manage to find a way to keep going, but yeah, hoping this thing will stop soon because this has been one hell of a year.
Yeah.
Okay, last question about your interviews, because I always find interviews and statistics to be really interesting. I don't take any of them, it's Bible-wise, but once you got done with all of this, and you're looking at the answers, and you're looking at your list of questions, did you come to a realization that there was possibly maybe a question that you should have asked and didn't think about in the first place?
Oh, I love that. I don't know if there's one that I felt like I missed. I think there were certain interviews where maybe we veered off course, and as we were expanding, I realized later, I never got to ask them that question, and so I'm missing that information about them. I also think it would be fun's a strange word for it. I would love to, interesting word for it. I would love to, as we hit 2021, if I had all the time and ability in the world to go back and do the interviews again and kind of do like a check-in 6 months later.
Yeah.
So I think I got a lot of what I liked about it. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. What I liked about the interviews was I got to get a variety of responses, and you kind of start to see where these leaders wanted to steer the conversation, right? So each executive director and artistic director kind of has one question that they're really excited about or that they really strongly feel about their answer. And so I think that was the thing that I found most fascinating, rather than my long list of questions, was where each conversation wanted to be directed and what they really wanted to expand on.
Gotcha. Okay, let's get a little personal here. Tough question. How are you going to survive as a costume designer?
Oh,
Yeah, sorry, I know.
George, if I knew, oh gosh, I don't know. I will say, I'm incredibly thankful to still have one more year of graduate school while this is happening. I have really good friends who graduated in May of this year, and they were kind of telling me, oh, I'm so sorry this happened in your third year. This would have been the year that all these things happened, and I just wish this hadn't happened. And I understand their concern, and I'm so grateful they felt that way, but I was just thankful to still have a stipend coming in and to have some place that I knew I had to show up to, and to have a thing that I was doing, even if it was just a theoretical project. And so as I'm coming up on graduation in May, I'm starting to kind of figure out what that means for me now as a struggling artist. And I have been spending this year focusing on diversifying my skill set and looking to be more involved in things that maybe I wasn't initially considering, or what are other areas where my skill set apply that are still within the storytelling and entertainment industry that I am so passionately in love with, that I decided to go into this career path and get a second degree in it.
That's commitment right there.
Yeah. So the true answer is, I don't know.
Well, the reason I asked, and it's a question everybody's asking themselves now, how do I continue as, whatever it is I happen to be right now? And as a playwright myself, I'm like, I can sit at home and write plays till I'm blue in the face, but who knows if they're ever going to go anywhere. Right. But you're also a storyteller, and I want to talk to you about that. But I have seen some stuff online, okay, plays that have been Zoomed online, and they've been done in different ways. But the more higher end of these, and I've seen quite a few of them, they've all had costumes. They've all needed, as far as I could tell, the stage managers, they've needed the set designers, they've needed the costume designers, they've needed everybody they've needed before. It's just that now the mode of production has changed, but the elements within those productions seem to be relatively close to what they were pre-pandemic. Let's talk about your storytelling, because you've mentioned to me that you are a storyteller, and I would really love to hear all about that.
Yeah. I think what I mean by that is that I think anyone who works in a performance area or an entertainment industry is a storyteller, right? That's what we're really doing at the end of the day. Even the technicians, they're storytellers. And so, I think for me, I always felt I could be happy doing any sector within the entertainment industry as long as I'm telling stories. That's the thing I've always been crazy about. That's all I've really ever wanted to do. And so I'd be happy doing whatever I had to do to keep doing that. I think, like you said, there's still a world where design is necessary. And like you said, we're still seeing even in Zoom plays, you have costumes of some kind. Even if there wasn't a designer hired, those actors got together and thought, okay, we're all going to do black shirts and blue jeans. And that's a costume decision.
It's a costume decision. Yes, it is. I've done it 100 times myself.
Yeah, and it informs the audience. So I think the nice thing the thing that I'm seeing as a designer coming out of all these digital productions is there's still a need for design in our storytelling. And also we still care if it looks good or not.
Yeah.
We've all seen some bad Zoom performance where we're like, wow, they really didn't think about the room they were in, right? And so that kind of does bring me a little bit of joy where I'm like, okay, so we still care about this. We still care about what things look like and the kind of essential beauty of what these stories are and how we communicate that. So I hope there's always going to be some form of storytelling. I think it might just look different than what we've been used to for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Talking about it being different, and because we were talking about tech, like Zoom, and right now that's been the way a lot of theater practitioners have managed to stay active in reaching out to the audience is Zoom and other like programs that, because we can't get together next to each other anymore, we have to get together via the internet and via the tech. And that solution has presented its own problems, of course, access and bandwidth and all that sort of happy nonsense. But I think it's also opened up the possibilities of reaching out to much wider audiences. Now, with that extremely long-winded intro, my question is, do you think that when this thing recedes and we start to get together again physically, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's whatever happens, and theater starts to return to normal, do you see, especially in maybe your area or similar areas, that the tech will have become a standard part of what theaters do?
I've wondered about that. I've thought, are we going to continue trying to do one Zoom play a season? If I'm hypothetically an artistic director of a company, do I plan Zoom productions into my season? Do I start building those into accessibility performances where now in addition to professional ASL translators and more accommodating lighting and design, do we also stream a section of our performances throughout the season? And I hope that is something that we start to see, because not everybody can afford to go see live theater. And it's something that I even struggle with, and I work in this industry, and I, as someone who wants to support other artists and go see the work, but I'm a graduate student, and so sometimes I kind of look at the ticket price and I go, ooh, $45.
Yeah.
And I go, do I know anyone at that company? Can I get a comp to that? And I try to finagle my way into something, because of course I want to pay artists for their time, but
yeah, sure.
I think this year is proving we're going to we're in an economic recession, and it's difficult, and it was difficult before that for people to afford to go see the art live. And so I think the lovely thing about Zoom streaming is you can pay $20 for a household and see a show that you wouldn't get to see otherwise.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's
the more
really
people you
great.
can reach with your art form, and this is a perfect opportunity for it.
And maybe it encourages them. Maybe they say, okay, we've Zoomed all of the plays that this company has produced this year, but we're going to splurge and we're going to go see that last one in person.
Yeah.
So maybe that attracts some new audience members, or at least makes it that, if I get sick and I can't come see a performance, can I transfer my ticket to the stream link for that night and see the stream of the show?
Why not? Possibilities are amazing now that it seems to be opening up opportunities, especially for people who can't make it out their doors.
Yeah.
I mean, we have those wheelchair spaces, and we do have special needs accommodations. But for those people who can't make it outside their doors, for whatever reason, be it physical or mental, restrictions, this is a beautiful way to bring your work to them.
Yeah, and I hope that continues. I think that's something that a lot of companies wanted to highlight in the interviews. Was we've had people from other countries tune in, we've had people from out of state tune in, and so I hope that by incorporating more technology into the way we operate, just also because it's high time, right? It's 2020, and we've got all of it at our fingertips.
Yeah.
So let's use it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to hit one last question. It's a biggie.
All right.
But you alluded to this, and you actually dealt with this in your article. It was much more than an allusion. While you were doing your research, you touched on the murder of George Floyd. And you spoke about that. Can you talk about what you found and how it affected what you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. The murder of George Floyd happened in May, which was right about the time that I was starting my interviews. So I think I had 1 week of interviews before his murder. And then it very quickly became a part of these conversations in a lot of ways without me even bringing it up. I mean, people the individuals that I talked to knew that this was happening in our country, that it was something that we needed to address as a community, as across every state. And it was something that they felt they needed to address within the way that they operated. And I think it's so hard to say, but I've always kind of felt that as much as our industry likes to say that we're a very inclusive space, I think we haven't always done a very good job of it in our operating systems, especially in regards to our peers who are people of color.
Sure.
And so what I was noticing is that people were acknowledging that this was something that they were complicit in, and that the industry promotes in a lot of ways, and that it isn't always equitable. And so without needing to embed a question into my interviews, it naturally started to bubble up, and people began talking about how they were acknowledging that they needed to change their operating system, that they wanted to be more supportive to their peers who were people of color, and how could we better support our BIPOC community. But like I talked about in my HowlRound article, I found that companies that were led by BIPOC leaders had been doing that work for a long time. And that came up in conversation. I had a couple artistic directors be like, we're seeing this happening and we're seeing it pop up, but we've been doing that for years. We're already there. It's time for everybody else to catch up. So it was we had some tough conversations, and I think a lot of people had to acknowledge that as much as we like to talk about sustainability and how the industry is going to change in this pandemic, they hadn't even thought of that until his murder.
The tough questions are usually the ones that open up to good things happening later on, breaking through. As long as somebody's willing to start the conversation,
yes,
other people will join in more and more. Yeah. I'm with you on that one. It's long past time for the whole of the community to be engaged, and for theater to reflect the people that not only inhabit its seats, but should be inhabiting its seats.
Yes. And I think and doing a better job to acknowledge our contributors. I mean, so my hope is that those companies are continuing in that work. And more importantly than that, I think that's an individual journey that all of us as storytellers need to go on. I mean, I know myself, there were times where I didn't question inequity or didn't even recognize it in the room. And I need to do better with that in the design world, particularly. In the past, there's been this shroud of mystery surrounding fees and contracts. And I think that's something we just have to get rid of and start talking about and breaking that glass ceiling, because how can we say we want a better industry without making sure that everybody has better access to those things? And so I'm hoping that in addition to these companies doing that work, that the individuals within those companies and that individuals who are freelancers are taking some time to think about what we could have done better and then what we are going to do better moving forward.
I agree. Tough conversations, but they need to be had, and they need to be had over and over.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Janice Rabian, thank you so very, very much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for joining us today and talking about what you found with your research.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been delightful.
I wish you nothing but the best of luck and the best of health in 2021. And let's hope this is a much better year than the last one was.
I'll drink to that on New Year's.
It'd be hard to do. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Hey kids, thanks for listening to Onstage Offstage. Onstage Offstage is produced monthly, and all of our shows can be found at onstageoffstage.org and also on iTunes. If you enjoy what we do, please recommend us to your friends.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at OnOffStage. And if you are a theater artist with an upcoming project of interest or work in a part of theater we haven't covered yet, or know someone in the theater who would make really good chat, send us a note at info@onstageoffstage.org. Onstage Offstage believes in and advocates for a world where all people are free to live their lives as they wish, in peace and without fear. We believe in universal respect, diversity, and equality in all areas of life for all people, no matter what their nationality, race, religion, age, sexual status, or gender. Onstage Offstage will never promote or endorse those who seek to diminish others because of who they are. I'm George Sapio. Thank you once again for listening, and please, kids, stay safe, be careful for yourself and for those with whom we share this rock. And as always, happy theatering to all of you.